Hollywood is literally littered with remakes. There's like a graveyard somewhere out there in the Hollywood Hills where studios have buried their attempts at remakes of taking their own history, taking films from yesteryear and sort of updating them for a modern audience, or taking films from world cinema and, sort of Hollywoodizing it. I think maybe that's an episode unto itself where we can go through perhaps the worst and the best remakes of all time. But today we've got to limit it to Spike Lee's remake of course, Kurosawa's Highest to Lowest. Much like the title itself, the film has these high points, these creative flourishes, these artistic achievements that still make, I think, Spike Lee worthy of putting more films out there. Like it gives him a pass. Like, yes, you were able to do these things, here's another couple of million to make your next film. But then it has an equal number, or perhaps greater than equal number, of low points, of moments that are so cringeworthy, that are so dull and uninspired, that one wonders if that check that you're about to give Spike Lee should not have a signature on it, or at least should have a capped budget. The movie is an adaptation of course, a book which Kurosawa himself adapted. And of course it starred this man, the one and only Toshiro Mifune. And in this, of course, we've got Denzel Washington, Jeffrey Wright, A$AP Rocky, of all the people in the world. And it's about a music mogul played by Denzel Washington, whose son is kidnapped. And the story, sort of unfolds. I don't know if I want to say I walked into this movie with sort of certain preconceived notions, and those notions being that Spike Lee tends to be mercurial. Spike Lee tends to be someone who does take creative swings and misses, and all tend to be sort of like, put into the very same movie, that you're left somewhat reeling. You're left questioning if perhaps he could have, on the editing room floor, left out all of the shit parts and just kept the really, really good parts. One wonders why he does this. Because the thing is that aside from movies like Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X, you've had like terrible ones like Old Boy, if you remember that one. Another remake by Spike Lee. What was that TV series? She's Gotta Have It All? She's Gotta Have It? I remember watching that. Yes. But I think it was so far back that I can't even remember certain details. But I will say this, is that I like something about... The thing I like about him is that he's still working on exploring the craft. I mean, he's still sort of like, And that's what will lead me to that was what will lead me to talk about another film of his, which he also put out recently. But we'll get to that in a bit. It's a documentary. I like that he's still taking chances. I like that he's still trying to push the envelope in ways that maybe he hasn't done before. That I like about him. But the thing is that when you do have sort of like, you have a bunch of ideas and you want to see them realized, I think that's when, as a filmmaker who's been working for almost like 30, 40 years, or for example, you have creative partners on board, I think that's where you need to be a little wary. That's where you need to be a little more, perhaps, tempered, in that you are putting out all of these ideas, but not all of those ideas need to see the light of day. Perhaps only the best ones need to see the light of day. And unfortunately, in Highest to Lowest, we see the best and the very worst. Denzel, of course, is Denzel, or Denzel as he apparently as it's supposed to be pronounced. And you cannot fault him as an actor. You can, of course, fault the script that is given to him, because there's moments in this movie where I am just amazed that someone of his caliber, of his standing, would agree to even do something like that. But let me start off with something that the movie, which is infused with, because of course the character is he's a mogul, and he is sort of like, Spike Lee does tend to sort of play up that a lot, sort of the culture, sort of African American culture. He does tend to sort of like, he wants that sort of like this sort of saturation almost of all of these elements, whether it's artistic, whether it's musical, stylistic, all of these things, he likes to bring that in. But for a movie that sort of deals with a guy who's apparently pioneered hip-hop and R&B, we don't get any of that in this movie. You have A$AP Rocky in this movie, and you start off the film with like these sort of glorious, almost wide shots of New York, and it plays to something off Broadway. I mean, it was so off-putting listening to that. And that's how the score is for like the very first, I would say, like 30 minutes of the movie. It's just like, it's like off tune. It's like there's this dissonance between like, what the story is, the characters are, the world they inhabit, and what's playing. So again, that's an example of a creative decision taken by Lee, and it just not panning out. It didn't work for me at all. The first half of the movie is boring. I cannot stress how dull that first half of the movie is. I mean, there's that scene in which there he is out on his balcony in this beautiful high-rise in New York. I think this is across the bridge, maybe in Brooklyn somewhere. And he receives the call from the kidnappers that, his son has been kidnapped. And there is no emotion to that scene. He literally receives the call, walks off, comes off, from the balcony into his dining room, and then calls his wife and he's like, "Oh, our son's been kidnapped." It is perhaps the most piss-poor way you could have done that scene. I'm not saying you could have been cliche and like, there's tight shots of his face reacting to the caller, sort of moments of hysteria or anything like that. But the scene lacks any immediacy, any tension. And that is what that first half literally does. It's just like sort of dull. It's sort of a complete flat line in terms of the potential highs and lows that the movie could have been. It doesn't do anything for me. And you're left wondering, why would Lee do that? Why would you have an actor like Washington just not even sort of like, use that role to do anything? It is astonishing how poorly edited and how poorly crafted that scene is. And then that goes for a number of other scenes until we get to this high point, but I'll get to that in a second. There's this other bizarre moment. Okay, so, and I'll explain why I have to sort of give away some of the plot. It is revealed that the kidnappers bungled the kidnapping itself, and instead of kidnapping Denzel Washington's son, they kidnapped Jeffrey Wright, who plays his like assistant chauffeur, gopher type person, who's also a convict and a 5%er, a former convict. They kidnap his son, who happens to be Denzel Washington's godson. But the kidnappers do not relent. Knowing that they've made this mistake, they still say that in order to, get this child back, we still want the same amount of money. As would happen, Denzel is considering selling his business. His business is apparently being bought. He doesn't want to sell it, so he's planning on putting up the money himself. But then now he's sort of this rock and hard place decision. Do I pay the ransom, or do I buy back my, sort of my baby, his music label. So there leads this sort of quandary where he has to figure out what to do. And in this one scene, he walks into his study, and there on the wall are pictures of James Brown and Aretha Franklin and Stevie Wonder. And sort of like, in this, he's like, what would you do, James? What would you do, Aretha? I'm like, what? I mean, you're calling on music greats to help you in this sort of moral dilemma. I mean, how the fuck does that make any sense? It doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, it's not like, of course, they're musical greats, but they weren't sort of great philosophers or people. Maybe they are people of great sort of moral conscience, but I mean, they're not somebody you would turn to in something like this. I mean, maybe you'd want to turn to, like, I don't know, Cornel West or Reverend Al Sharpton or somebody like that, somebody of some sort of at least ethical and moral standing, rather than the people who've defined the R&B industry. I mean, it was such a bizarre moment. Why would you put that in this movie? Why would you write that into the script? Why would you have Denzel act a scene like that? The movie only picks up, and I'm so glad that the music picks up around the same time as well, because there is, this happens around the time when, they decide on paying the ransom, and then, the kidnappers say, oh, you have to get on the train and stuff like that, so it turns into this whole sort of chase scene around New York, while, I think it's Puerto Rican Pride Day or whatever, while that's going on. And sort of like, there's this piano piece, which now I'm like, wow. I mean, that's where I feel that the movie, actually forgets that it was this dull-ass movie for like, the past 35, 40 minutes and actually comes into some spirit, some life. And I'm forgetting the names of the composers for this particular piece. It's called The Chase. You can find it out there. But it is a wonderful piece. Beautifully done. Beautifully. And I mean, sort of like, it works so well with that particular scene. So well. Because, that's where, if you want this movie to be a thriller, the urgency of the moment comes. And you've like, finally, we have somewhat of a movie that isn't sort of like, it can be an exploration of black identity, sure. It can be an exploration of a modern element that he wanted to bring into it, of sort of cancel culture, right? But then it is a thriller at the end of the day. So let it live up to that. That happens, really good. Then that leads to this other fantastic scene that I'm going to try and include it in this review. If not, for copyright reasons, just watch the movie, in which Denzel and Jeffrey Wright, not believing the police, they then chase down, they track the kidnappers and they find out who it is. And they trace them to this recording studio where A$AP Rocky, the lead kidnapper, is recording. And there you have Denzel come in. So A$AP Rocky's in the recording booth, and you have Denzel sort of like, by the deck. And what leads is to this spontaneous sort of rap battle where they start like spitting bars. And it was so well done.
All that old shit you talking about, nah, nigga, something more like, I got the blicky on me, OG, so don't try nothing tricky on me, OG.
I got mine too, Young G, 9mm, and a lot of reasons why you shouldn't fuck with me either, Young G. I'm the one that can pay you. I don't need to be the one that's gonna slay you.
Fuck, is this a battle right now?
It sort of is exactly the kind of tone of this movie that I had hoped would be throughout this film, but no. But it makes sense in that scene, because here you have these two characters coming from the backgrounds that they do. They are, of course, African American, but then they're both musically inclined. They're both quite talented, the characters, of course, and even the actors, because they do a very good job. This is, of course, Denzel Washington. And it's just this sort of like, call and response moment that is really, really well done. For me, at least, the high point of the movie. But then he rewards us, or at least punishes us, I don't know, with this bizarre music video type, I don't know, dream sequence or whatever, where you have, I mean, it's almost in the courtroom. ASAP, he's doing his rap bit. He's got his music video girls and doing their things. And poor old Denzel Washington has to, I think he shows his age.
Shout out to my felons, boy, we caught another felony. Young felon, nigga, uptown, fuck you telling me.
In that moment, he has to sort of, bob his head to the music or somehow or the other just play, show some interest. But it is, as the kids would say, so cringeworthy. I don't think I ever wanted to see, you never want to see your heroes brought so low. And yet in this scene, I saw Denzel reduced to, I don't know what to say. It was just, even right now, I don't know if you can tell from my expressions that it is so difficult watching that scene that at one point I had to skip it. I was like, I can't see Denzel doing this. Please watch it. And I'm going to try and put it here on for you guys. I couldn't put myself through that. Like, he's almost acting like he's special, like he's mentally challenged or something in that. Bizarre. And then we cut to this other scene that is actually pretty good, where you have both of them in this side-by-side split-screen cut. A$AP Rocky and thing, there sort of, he's finally confronting him in jail. And slowly and gradually the scene, sort of that divide between them is reduced. I would have loved to see them actually merge, because that's a scene where A$AP is telling Denzel that we are almost like the same person. It doesn't merge, but they get really close. And then we get to another goddamn scene in which you have like this young aspiring singer sing for literally 5 minutes. And I'm like, man, you could have edited this down to at least like 2. We didn't need to see the entire rendition of that song. You could have just cut. Which is something. Spike Lee, I mean, if this served as a movie that is of middling quality, something that Spike Lee, I think, does very well, and if you want to watch a Spike Lee film this year, it's his documentary, Katrina, Hell and Back, which is, of course, about Hurricane Katrina, a Netflix documentary, which is very interestingly done, because the thing is that the first 2 parts, done by another director, and it is your typical documentary in that it is very by the numbers, in that it's archival footage, it's talking heads and going back and forth. But what's engrossing about it is, of course, the story, because it is, of course, this unfolding disaster. It is the story of Hurricane Katrina, which I don't think requires any introductions or prefaces by me. We all know what happened. And they have got very good access. They have access to all of these people who are there on the ground. And that was something that I think documentaries always benefit from, where you have really good, where you have those people. Often at times, documentaries don't get access to the right kind of people, and then the documentary does suffer. But in this case, you have you have the victims, you have people who actually suffered through that entire thing. There was this heartbreaking moment where that one man loses his mother and his grandchild in the very same moment, and that was something that was very difficult to watch. A community leader who then later on helped rebuild parts of the lower Ninth Ward. You then had that very interesting lieutenant general who was part of the rescue and the disaster management at the time. But where I think this documentary really triumphs is the 3rd episode for this, and that is directed by Spike Lee, and it's feature length. It's an hour and a half. And that is done in true Spike Lee fashion, and it's so well done, which is in contrast to what happened on Highest to Lowest. If Highest to Lowest was the unnecessary remake, then, Katrina, Hell and Back is perhaps essential cinema for this year. it starts off with one of the characters, but with one of the affectees of Katrina. He's a poet. I'm forgetting his name, but I mean his street name, or at least his poet name, his nom de guerre is Shakespeare. And he's there in front of this graveyard, and he delivers this spoken word piece. And again, this is Spike Lee sort of really capturing those moments, and it's so well done. It's really well shot. The camera's kind of looking up at him, almost in reverence to, the archway of the graveyard, and he's delivering that thing. Then, of course, you have interviews with various people, experts, victims, so on and so forth, and sort of like, bits and pieces of the sort of what they're saying tend to be highlighted on screen. Then you have Spike Lee himself as the documentarian, at times not sort of inserting himself into the story, but at least asking questions off camera, sort of from behind the camera, which also is really good. Because he then has, this rapport with the subjects, which I think really helps in them answering and sort of getting more out of them. You have Bunk from The Wire, the actor Wendell Price or Pierce, who himself is a New Orleans native and whose family, I think, were from the lower Ninth Ward. I'm not sure. But they, of course, I think lost their home in that. And what an eloquent man himself he is. Because, he says, and that's the title of this third episode, God Takes Care of Fools and Children. And seeing him speak with his eloquence is really quite satisfying. The Lieutenant General, whose name I'm forgetting, him on camera, being quite potty mouth, but sort of like, also saying that, to hell with all of these people who are responsible for the response to Katrina. And of course, 20 years on, people are still trying to rebuild their homes, still trying to rebuild their lives. That's where, sort of like, the documentary itself, the story really worked for me. And credit to Spike Lee on this one. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for Highest to Lowest. So I think if you guys were to watch, if you wanted a Spike Lee fix for 2025, please check out Katrina, Hell and Back, which is on Netflix. Highest to Lowest, skip that.